Hello and welcome to the Griddy Films Nitty Gritty review of Star Wars Episode VIII, The Last Jedi. This review is going to contain tons of spoilers, so if you're looking for a spoiler-free review, be sure to check out my itty-bitty spoiler-free review for this movie. So this is, of course, the 2017 sci-fi movie written and directed by Rian Johnson and starring Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Daisy Ridley. If you haven't seen this movie yet, it's kind of like if... Nah, you know what? I'm not even gonna do my normal comparison. If you don't know what you're getting yourself into with the Star Wars movie, I don't know what to tell you. It's a Star Wars movie. So the first category in the grid is going to be genre. Obviously, any Star Wars movie is going to fall within the sci-fi genre, but I think any movie that falls within the Star Wars franchise has almost become a genre unto itself. From hands getting chopped off, to strange architectural decisions, to the prophesized savior archetype character, there's a myriad of tropes and cliches and character archetypes so specific to the Star Wars franchise. And I know Star Wars fans everywhere have kind of taken a pretty clear stance for or against this decision, but Rian Johnson really chose to step away from a lot of those tropes with The Last Jedi. I, for one, really liked that decision. Some of the ways that he went against the Star Wars genre, if you will, are decisions like having Rey's parents be nobody. She's not a prophesied savior. She doesn't come from a long line of heroes. She's a nobody that happens to be strong with the Force. A lot like Anakin Skywalker was before he became Darth Vader. She's just thrown in the middle of this, and she's nobody. And she's going to become somebody, not because she's strong with the Force, but because of what she's going to do with it, and because of the decisions she makes in life. We also don't see any limbs get cut off, which is mildly disappointing, I guess, but I kind of liked that instead of the predictable conclusion to a fight, we got some really fresh and really badass fight scenes. This is the 9th movie already within the franchise, so it's nice to see some deviations from the usual plot points and cliches and tropes. And while Johnson still deviated from a lot of these tropes, the conflict between light and dark was still very much at the center of the story, and it's still very much so about good versus evil and never giving up hope, which have always been very strong themes throughout the Star Wars franchise. So I gave the genre category overall an 8 out of 10, which is going to be an A-. So it was definitely very solid, but it just wasn't quite pushed into that perfect range. There were still some things I felt that could have been done a little bit better or a little bit differently. But still, 8 out of 10, A-, definitely a strong grade. So next category is going to be writing. And I was extremely impressed with the script for The Last Jedi. One thing that I really, really liked is that every single character, and there are a lot of them, they all had outer goals and inner needs. And not only that, but each of their outer goals was slightly different. Luke Skywalker, his outer goal is to prove to Rey that the Jedi line needs to end. But internally, he needed to reconnect with the Force. Leia's outer goal was to lead the rebels to victory, or at least to help them survive. Her inner need is just to find peace within all of this battle and war and death that she's lived through pretty much her entire life. Rey goes through a few different outer goals. The first being to find and recruit Luke. After that doesn't quite go as planned, she decides to find Kylo Ren and convert him to the light side. And then when that doesn't quite go according to plan, she decides to go find the rebels and help them on her own. And throughout all of that, her internal need is simply to find her place in all of this. I could keep going with more examples, but like I said, there are a lot of characters in this movie, and I think you get the idea. I also really liked the character arcs in this movie. Pretty much every character had a unique story arc, but I think my favorite came with Rose's. She started off as a resistance fighter who stayed strictly behind the scenes and hero worshipped those who went out and fought. And by the end of the movie, she became one of those heroes. But what I found really interesting is that while she was hero worshipping at the beginning of the movie, she was idolizing the idea of going out in the world, finding what you hate and destroying it. She talks about it when they go to the casino. She's like, everything's beautiful here, but I hate it. Look what they had to do to get rich. She just wants to destroy it all. And then by the end of the movie, she has the realization of being a hero isn't about destroying what you hate, it's about saving what you love. It was interesting to see that transition of how she defines a hero. I also like that the character arcs of Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker are mirror versions of each other. They both realize the Jedi need to end, the world needs to change, but they go about it in different ways. Luke initially wants to, his solution to ending the Jedi line is to just passively end it. And then by the end of the movie, he tells Kylo Ren, I'm not the last Jedi, there's gonna be others, and I think he wants the line to continue, just in a different way than it had before. Whereas with Kylo Ren, he also realizes that the Jedi line needs to end, and his solution is, let's let it all end. The Sith will end, the Jedi will end, the First Order will end, the Resistance will end, but then his response to that is, well, and then I'll rule it as the supreme leader, and he still wants to go to the dark side. So overall, I gave the writing of The Last Jedi a 7.6 out of 10, which is going to be a B+. There were a few issues I had with the plot that kind of kept it from getting pushed into that A range, but even within the plot, I didn't find any, glaring plot holes. Nothing bothered me too much. I know a lot of people disagree with me, and probably upon multiple viewings, I'll start to see some of those things. But as far as a first viewing goes, I really liked the script, and particularly how character-driven it was. So the next category in the grid is going to be the editing and the special effects. There were definitely some old-school wipes and other kind of iris transitions, things like that just come straight from the original. And that would fall under the category of kind of a trope of the genre of Star Wars. In any other movie, you would see that transition. I think it came straight out of, Windows Movie Maker. But it manages to pull it off because it's such a homage or a trope coming from that original trilogy. But what I particularly liked in The Last Jedi is that you noticed them when they're there, but they were used in just the right times, and there was just the right amount of them to not be over the top or too distracting, while still giving it that feel of a classic Star Wars movie. I also thought the fight scenes in The Last Jedi were particularly well executed. I think the fight scene where Rey and Kylo Ren fight together, it might be my favorite fight scene in all of Star Wars. So it was just, had a freshness to it, while still, feeling very much like a Star Wars lightsaber fight. So there was that scene in particular that I thought worked really, really well. And then there was the scene where Luke fights Kylo Ren. It felt very much like when Darth Vader fought Obi-Wan in the original trilogy. It had that almost a Western duel feel to it, like a lot of the original Star Wars, I think, had. The fight scenes were just really strong in this one, and I think some of my favorites I've seen in a Star Wars movie yet. There was one pretty big weakness within the special effects, and that's going to come in the scene where Leia is floating in space. Thematically, it was a really amazing scene. I love that we finally got to see her use the Force, and I thought for sure she was gone. I mean, with Carrie Fisher being gone, I know they're going to have to figure out how she's not going to be in the next one, so I thought for sure that, this was it. This was her ride out, and then when she came back, it was a great moment, and like I said, thematically, it worked really well. It was a powerful moment. That said, the special effects just came off as looking a little bit silly. So while it worked on a thematic level, the special effects, I can't even quite put my finger on what was wrong or what they could have done better, but something was off. For such a powerful scene, I would have liked to have seen it executed in a more powerful way. I did love the use of the red salt at the end, but I thought it was a great way to kind of imply a heavy amount of violence without the censors stepping in and demanding an R rating. So I thought that was a great use of a planet and its natural elements to thematically enhance the scene. So for the editing and the special effects, I gave The Last Jedi a 7.6 out of 10, which is going to be a B+. The next category in the grid is going to be the sound design, and this is going to include the score and soundtrack, as well as the sound effects and the overall sound mix. And I'm pretty sure this has been true of every Star Wars movie to date, but the sound design for The Last Jedi was perfect. Of course, you have that classic John Williams score. There's just something about him. He knows how to write a theme, like not just a song, but a theme and an anthem for a franchise. He just composes very well-rounded scores, and Last Jedi is no exception. The score, of course, was perfect. I also loved the way the score worked with the iconic lightsaber sound effects in a few scenes, particularly the scene where Kylo Ren and Rey are fighting together. Right when that fight scene first starts, you really get a rhythm going where the score is just really in sync with the action, and it's choreographed to the beat. Just an excellent sound mix going on overall within that scene. And the sound effects throughout are amazing. Obviously, like I said, you've got the iconic lightsabers, the soundscape of the casino, which is going to be much different than the soundscape on a starship. So there's just a lot of different things going on within the sound mix that really enhances the universe and feels very true to the original trilogy while also building up new things that are unique to this trilogy. And then you have the island scenes with Luke Skywalker, which I thought was a really nice blend of a way to add a lot of natural noises, the waves crashing against the rocks, things like that really kind of hit home the message of, the Force and balance within nature. So I just really liked the soundscape of the island. I thought really contributed to that message, and particularly the scene where Luke is teaching Rey what the Force really is, and that, it's not a power that some people have and some people don't. It's not something that's within you. It's something that's within everything, and it's, it's balance, it's nature, it's life, it's death, it's all of that. So I thought that the sound mix and the soundscape of the island, played a really nice role within the storytelling, particularly in that scene. So yeah, the sound mix overall is just excellent and easily 10 out of 10 perfect. And like I said, pretty sure every Star Wars movie to date is going to have that same score in that category. So yeah, perfect 10 out of 10 for the sound design. So the next category in the grid is going to be the acting and the casting. I thought the acting was fairly solid throughout The Last Jedi. It wasn't awesome, but it was solid. I thought Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver were by far the strongest performances in the movie, but I also really loved Carrie Fisher reprising her role as Princess Leia, and Kelly Marie Tran playing the new character of Rose. It was also great to see Laura Dern, who I didn't know was going to be in it. However, I felt like both the character as well as Dern herself were massively underutilized. So that said, the strength of any Star Wars movie has never really been within the acting, so I think it's able to get away with some weaker performances. Nobody was awful. I think the cast is a cast of very strong actors. It's just maybe not their best performances ever, which is mostly due to just the feel of the movies themselves. I mean, you can look back to the prequel trilogy and you can just see from that there's some extremely strong actors giving awful performances. And that's on the extreme side of things. There's nothing near that bad in The Last Jedi. But that's just an example of how really amazing actors like Natalie Portman or Ewan McGregor can give not very good performances. And it doesn't mean that they're bad actors. And I think the same is true here. I don't think it's the strongest performances we're ever going to see out of these actors. I thought Mark Hamill did a pretty good job reprising his role as Luke Skywalker. His performance is quite a bit stronger here than we saw in any of the original trilogy movies. I did really love Mark Hamill's performance in the scene where he talks to R2-D2. I just thought it was great to get a little glimpse of the old Luke, and you just see this, this young farm boy who's just excited about the world and just thinks it's the best thing ever to see his droid BFF, and you just see a little glimpse of joy and childlike happiness there, which I thought was great. It was a brief scene and just a fleeting moment of the old Luke, but I thought that was a great performance, and I really enjoyed that little bit there. So the acting overall got a 7.43 out of 10, which is going to be a B+. Not quite pushed into that A range. Like I said, nobody's giving award-worthy performances here, but there's nothing awful. A B+ is still a good grade. The next category is going to be the directing and the cinematography, and I was extremely impressed with Rian Johnson's directing in this movie. Starting from the very beginning of the movie, when we see the death of Rose's sister Paige, the way that scene was shot had some interesting mise-en-scène and some interesting camera movement going, and it really built up this character as a hero, and I think we really felt the loss when she died. And that's some really strong directing right there. And the cinematography throughout was just gorgeous, which is true of pretty much every Star Wars movie. But what I particularly liked in The Last Jedi is that the lighting didn't just look pretty, it also contributed to the storytelling in interesting ways and really did a good job of setting the mood. And they did all that while still looking realistic enough that it wasn't distracting. One scene that really stands out is where Rey is talking to Luke, and they're talking about Kylo Ren and the battle between light and darkness. And throughout that scene, Rey is sitting, her face is half in light and half in dark. It's a little on the nose, but it's also very true to the Star Wars franchise. I mean, we get that kind of symbolism a lot throughout the past movies, and I thought that it was executed in a way, in that scene, that it wasn't too over the top or obnoxious, and it still looked really gorgeous. So it was able to do a lot within that scene, as far as, setting the mood, telling the story, looking realistic while also looking beautiful. Like, it was able to do a lot. So it's just one example of how the cinematography really helped within the story and just was really impressive. So for the directing and cinematography category overall, I gave The Last Jedi a 10 out of 10. Perfect. So I'm going to combine the next two categories because they're pretty closely related in this movie, and that's going to be the character aesthetics and the environmental aesthetics. Character aesthetics is going to be hair, makeup, and costumes, while environmental aesthetics is going to be sets, props, and locations. Pretty much any sci-fi movie that doesn't focus on the character and environmental aesthetics is probably not worth watching. And I think the Star Wars franchise was one of the first to really put that idea out there. You can tell by looking at pretty much any character within this movie. And again, there is a large cast of characters in The Last Jedi, but they all have a different look that tells you, maybe not necessarily where each person is from, but for sure that, this person is from a different place than this person. And the same is true for all of the sets and locations. You have not just different planets that are all very unique from each other, but also the different types of spaceships throughout. So yeah, for both character and environmental aesthetics, easily a perfect 10 out of 10 for both. The next category in the grid is going to be impact on film. In this category, I break up into 3 subcategories. We're going to have the critical impact, the cult impact, and the inspirational impact. With a movie this new, I pretty much just look to Rotten Tomatoes for the critical impact, and as of the recording of this video, it has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 8.2 out of 10. So far the critics seem to be receiving The Last Jedi pretty well, so I went ahead and gave it a 4 out of 5 for the critical impact. Now also on Rotten Tomatoes, over on the audience score, we're going to have a much lower rating of only 56% with an average rating of 3.3 out of 5. So this to me seems to indicate that fans are either loving it or hating it. So for the cult impact, I kind of just split the difference and gave it a 2.5 out of 5. There's definitely going to be a cult impact because it is a Star Wars movie, but there does seem to be a pretty big divide amongst fans over whether or not it is a good Star Wars movie. So that's why the rating's kind of on the lower side, but I just decided to split the difference and call it a 2.5 out of 5. For the inspirational impact, I gave The Last Jedi a 3 out of 5. I do think the deviations from the typical Star Wars kind of narratives is going to inspire future filmmakers and maybe get people thinking a little bit differently or a little bit more creatively about franchises or about sci-fi movies or about Star Wars specifically. So I do think there's going to be some inspirational impact just because of the deviation that this movie took within the genre, so to speak, of Star Wars. I also think the movie is just really well directed and really well made overall, and I think any well-made movie is going to inherently inspire future filmmakers in one way or another, so that also contributed to the 3 out of 5 score that I gave for The Last Jedi for inspirational impact. So the score for the impact of The Last Jedi is going to average out to a 6.33 out of 10, which is a B-. The last category in the grid is going to be overall enjoyment. and I gave The Last Jedi a 9 out of 10. I found it extremely enjoyable, and I think it might be my favorite Star Wars movie, at least as far as the newer generation of movies go. I liked it more than The Force Awakens, and I think Rogue One is probably a close second behind The Last Jedi. I also gave The Last Jedi 3 points of extra credit. The first point is going to be for the silence in space scene. Not only was that scene just epic and awesome, but you also just gotta acknowledge the scientific accuracy of silence in space. So easily a point of extra credit for both the thematic impact and the scientific accuracy. The second point goes to Snoke's death scene. It was just epic, and then it led into the awesome lightsaber battle, and then the great character moment at the end of that battle. So it's just awesome all the way around. So even though I already mentioned that scene earlier, I definitely had to give it a point of extra credit here. And the third point of extra credit is going to go to the Luke Skywalker R2-D2 scene. I know I mentioned it earlier when talking about acting, but there was just something so charming and just delightful about that scene. So I had to give it a point of extra credit. It was nice to see the old Luke, even if it was just for a second. So the total score for Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, is going to be an 88.96, which is a solid A. There's definitely a 50-50 split amongst fans right now over whether or not this is a good Star Wars movie, but I thought it was, and I think anybody who has, maybe not the diehard fans, because I think that's where you start getting that split, but certainly amongst more casual fans, which I have to admit I am a more casual fan, it's worth it. I thought it was much better than The Force Awakens, and I enjoyed The Force Awakens, and that's really about all I have to say about Star Wars The Last Jedi. Hey, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to Griddy Films on YouTube and like and share this video. You can also follow Griddy Films on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you'd like to learn more about the Griddy Films grid rating system, you can check out the Griddy Films website, and if you'd like to learn how you can support Griddy Films, you can check out the Griddy Films Patreon page. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.